Good afternoon. My name is Curtis Valentine, co-director of the Reinventing America Schools project and your moderator for today. Today's event is co-sponsored by the Reinventing America Schools project and the 74. The Reinventing America Schools project is housed at the Progressive Policy Institute and promotes a model of schools we call 21st century school systems, or systems that provide parents more choice and give schools more autonomy in return for more accountability. Our research shows that in urban America, public school systems that do this produce the most rapid improvement in student performance. I called today's webinar, Tell Them We Are Rising, for a reason. The phrase refers to an interaction between General Oliver O. Howard, for which Howard University is named, an interaction that General Howard had with a 13-year-old named Richard Robert Wright. While General Howard was visiting the South, Howard asked this young 13-year-old young Wright, "What should I tell the people in the North about the plight of former slaves here in the South?" The young Wright replied, "Tell them we are rising." The purpose of this webinar is to discuss and dispel the misconceptions and tell our own story about the power of Black and Brown parents to access educational options for their children and the impact the federal government has on those options amid the recent proposed changes to the federal charter schools program. Let's get started. Before we introduce an amazing panel, we want to get to know who's in the audience, who's here with us. Here is an opportunity, a poll for which you can respond. You only have one option, but for us, the question is, which group do you most identify, particularly as it relates to this conversation? If you're like me, I fall into about 3 or 4 of these categories, actually. But for you, in this particular topic around parent choice and access to educational options for your children, what do you most identify with as in this particular group? As you're answering that question, I'm going to ask my panelists to introduce themselves. So we're going to start first with our sister, Ebony Lee. Tell us who you are and what you do. Welcome.
Thank you, Curtis. I am Ebony Lee, and I'm a partner at the Charter School Growth Fund, and I lead our work on policy, communications, and advocacy.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We have next Atasha James. Introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Atasha James. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Legends Charter School, located in Lanham, Maryland, and Prince George's County.
Thank you so much. Next up, Dr. Howard Fuller. Introduce yourself.
Well, you just introduced me, and I'm a distinguished professor emeritus at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
And let me just tell folks before I go on, all my panelists are being really modest right now. We're going to talk a lot more about their bios, but I'm going to go to Earl Phalen. He's probably going to give you the very Harvard version of his bio as well. But Earl Phalen, tell us about yourself.
Sure. Great to be here with everybody today. My name is Earl Martin Phalen. I serve with a nonprofit called the George and Veronica Phalen Leadership Academies, which helps turn around underperforming schools. And then I'm also the CEO of Kansas City Scholars, which helps young people get to and through college debt-free and into a career that will give their family economic security.
Thank you so much again for my amazing panel. What we're going to do now is actually show the results of our survey to find out who is in the audience. 34% of those in the audience are educators. Another 34% are advocates, but we do have a number of parents, journalists, funders, and policymakers in the audience. So glad to see that educators took time out of their day to join us today. Well, let's jump right in. And Howard, I want to come to you first. Before we jump into the topic of parent choice and in 2022, I want to put this into context for those who are listening in. We placed parent choice in the title rather than school choice for a reason. Talk to us about the history of Black parents in America and their power and their fight to make choices on where their children attend school?
Yeah, so thanks for that question, Curtis. The thing I want to say, and say it as briefly as I can, we all need to understand that this issue of choice, parents being able to choose education for their children, is not a recent phenomenon for Black people. Because if you go back to the time when we came out of slavery, we came out of slavery with the clear understanding that we were liberated, but we were not free. And back at that time, we felt that the pathway to, quote, citizenship was education. And so when Black people began to talk about the development of educational institutions, and we need to be clear that there were some schools that were developed even during slavery. There's research out there that talks about those schools. But coming out of slavery, the idea was, how can we build formal educational institutions? And one of the things the audience needs to be clear about is that the public education structure in the South, the catalyst for that was Black people. And it was a huge effort during Reconstruction. And there's a lot of, again, research out there about the role that we played in the development of, quote, public educational institutions in this country. But after the Missouri Compromise took place, one thing that happened was the white people who had lost the Civil War were in essence put back into power. And one of the first things that they did was to stop Black people from going to schools that we had helped develop, because now they were reaching out to poor white people who early on had felt like they didn't need an education because the rich white people was going to take care of everything. But that changed. And then all of a sudden, it became an issue of Black people not being allowed to go to these schools. So Black people then we had to build our own schools. And so this issue of our being able to access options other than the traditional system, it didn't start with Milton Friedman. It didn't start with the voucher bill that was passed in Milwaukee in the 1980s. It didn't start with the charter school bill that was passed in Minnesota in the 1990s for Black people. It started with our trying to get an access to education post-slavery. And so I just want to put that out there because so many people talk about us in ways that are historically inaccurate, and they do not, in fact, give Black people credit for what contributions we've made in this society, and equally important, don't give us the acknowledgement of the continuing struggle that we've had to try to get an education in this country.
And you mentioned continuing struggle. And so I want to talk about present day, 2022. How would you explain, how would you characterize the current state of parent choice? And why do you use the term parent choice rather than school choice?
Yeah, I use that term because, and I lost this argument 30 years ago. And so people use those two terms interchangeably, but they shouldn't. But I know I lost that argument, but I'm still arguing anyway. I didn't get in this fight for schools to be able to choose kids. I got in this fight to empower low income and working class Black parents to be able to choose an environment for their children. And so for me, this is not just a semantical issue. It's a philosophical and principle issue, right? Because to me, the idea was to empower low-income and working class parents to be able to choose. Because the issue in this country, Curtis, I'll make this brief, has never been parent choice. It's been who has it. And so we all know that if you have money in this country and schools don't work for your kids, you can either move to communities where they do work, you can put them in private schools, or you can get the most expensive tutoring on the planet. The problem has been for low income and working class people to access some of those choices that those of us with money have. Because we all know that there are people teaching in the public school system structure in this country who oppose parent choice, but they got their own kids in private schools so that they get paid with tax money to send their kids to private schools, but they oppose having the parents whose kids they're teaching, they don't want them to have those options.
No, absolutely, and I think that is a struggle to have those conversations. And today is going to be a very tough conversation for some. And I do welcome folks to again comment in the chat, but also to share this conversation with others because it's happening around the country. But we want to make sure that we are based on facts, having the context, and understand what our options are. Ebony, I do want to come to you. We are here in part because of the news of the changing impact the federal government is proposing to have on parent choice. What role does the federal government have now on parent choice? And what is the charter school program that I referenced earlier?
Thanks for the question. So just a little bit of context. The federal government is only about 8 to 10% of budgets around education, right? And so when we talk about it, it's often like considered much bigger or having a much bigger footprint in terms of our budget determinations. That being said, even though it's only that 10% of the budget, the position is one of influence and power. And so we look to the federal government to use their bully pulpit, to use their outside influence to incentivize choice, to actually encourage choice from their position. They have a microphone that's bigger than anyone else's. And so through things like competitive federal grant programs, they can incentivize choice for parents. They can make it easier, right? With that, you could also make it harder. And so to your question, Curtis, the Charter Schools program is a program that's been in existence for about 28 years. Recently, in March, a notice of proposed priorities was issued in the Federal Register. And that notice was about 13 pages long, and it outlined a set of new rules and regulations that would govern how this 28-year-old program would be administered moving forward. And we were given a 30-day comment period to respond to the things that were being proposed. The Charter Schools program, and I'm not being hyperbolic when I say, is a lifeline to a lot of new charter schools. It is money for startup, it is money for growth, and it is money for replication. When charters don't have access to the funding that traditional public schools have. Charters are public schools, so these are public dollars, but they don't always have the same funding that our traditional public schools have. So this program, while only $440 million every year, its influence is outsized. And 1 of every 2 charter schools in America today has had CSP funding. So that's why it's so important and why over 30,000 comments were submitted to the Department of Education responding to these proposed changes that threaten parent choice. We can look over the past 2 years at COVID and the impact that it has had on education to get a real sense for how parents are feeling about the choices that they want to make regarding their children's education. When the world shut down, students weren't allowed to go into the classroom in the way that they had been previously. And many parents got a bird's eye view of what's happening inside of classrooms. And they have made it abundantly clear that they want more say, not less, in how their children are educated. And one of the choices that we know parents are making are for charter schools. Well, these rules, or proposed rules, I should say, would limit that. And that's not what parents are saying they want. So the federal government is in a position to actually aid parent choice. And it's up to them to further that or to limit it. Because right now what they're suggesting is that charter schools would need to gain the approval of a traditional public school as a part of their application process around collaboration. Most charter operators that I know and that I work with from my seat at CSGF are happy to collaborate and have instituted many programs where they work with the traditional public schools, but it's not mandated, right? And so that is what the reaction has been from the charter sector. Let us do this willingly and in with a coalition of the willing in areas and in places where it makes sense, not because the federal government is telling me that I have to do something. The other thing that folks are reacting to is this notion that charter schools can only open in places where the traditional public school is under enrolled. Well, that makes no sense. We've just talked about COVID and the impact that it has had on schools and attendance. Parents have chosen to go different places. And if a parent chooses not to go to the traditional public school, and that causes an enrollment decline because they want a charter school, the parent should have that option. And so charter shouldn't be limited to where they can expand. And then I would say the third thing that people are reacting to in these proposed rules is this notion that charter schools are somehow adding to the segregation problem that we have in America. So I'm not going to be a defender of the federal government's failed efforts over the past 30, 40, 50 years to desegregate schools. But what charter school leaders are doing is creating opportunities in places where people have self-selected to be around their own people, or they've been forced into zip codes or attendance zones that are very homogenous. But when you say to charter schools, because you are culturally affirming or you're seeking to serve a particular population, that you shouldn't exist because it adds to segregation, again, that is a problem because parents choose to have their students in schools that will bolster their cultural affirmation, whether these are Black students, Indigenous people, or even our Latinx students. People should have the right to attend the schools of their choice that are best for their children, and parents are in the best seat to make that decision, not the federal government. And so I think these CSP rules or proposed rules have ignited a flame in people because it seems like the federal government is trying to take away choice from parents and not aid in it.
Curtis, I'd like to add on to Ebony in the sense that additionally, the federal government making this proclamation intersects with each state law very different. So according to the National Alliance of Public Charter Schools, who has a national ranking for charter laws by state, how this impacts charter operators in Maryland, who according to this website has the weakest charter law in one of the most affluent neighborhoods for Black and Brown students. This sends the signal that maybe this isn't a good thing and that maybe parents should defer to the traditional public school system. And in an area as large and populous as Prince George's County, where they serve almost 200,000 students, it's really challenging to know that there's only 10 public charter schools in this entire county who have teachers who are unionized workers who also want and work in these public school spaces, who are now getting additional signals that say, maybe this isn't the vocation, maybe this isn't the way, or it leaves parents feeling as if they're doing something nefarious or slick when they don't choose to engage in the traditional public school system. And so the messaging from the federal government in a multi-pronged approach is very dangerous.
No, thank you for that context, Atasha. In many ways, I started my career in this work in Annapolis, fighting for that, and we continue to fight for that autonomy for school leaders to run the schools the way they best see fit, but most importantly, centering parents and students. And so we'll talk about your school and we'll talk about Earl's school. But Ebony, I did want to follow up, and this is sort of putting, so folks are going to see Atasha James and Earl Phalen and say, wow, there's a number of African Americans who are starting schools, and this is amazing. But in many ways, there is a struggle for people of color to start, run, and expand in this space. And this really flies in the face of a lot of what Dr. Fuller mentioned, which is a history of a people in the country who, in many ways, were out in front in starting schools and really pushing the system of education in this country whether it be Rosenwald schools, Freeman schools, all the schools that were created during Reconstruction were created by people who look like us. Can you talk a little bit about the percentages and just sort of the state of Black and Brown Americans starting schools? What do the numbers look like? What do the struggles look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I so appreciated Dr. Fuller just giving us, the historical context, because I do think people forget. So what I will say is, particularly in the charter school movement as it exists today, and in particular in the Charter School Growth Funds portfolio, 60% of our portfolio have schools that are led by people of color. And every day and every year, we see more and more leaders stepping up, wanting to create schools in communities that they are from, right? So this is less about outsiders coming in to support and help low-income Black and Brown children. It is much more about self-determination, right? These are individuals who have decided, I'm from this place and I want to make my mark and I want to help kids that look like me. And so over the past several years, you've seen more and more leaders of color putting schools in places that serve students of color.
Thank you. And I do want to come to you, Atasha. And Tasha has her own story about how being a parent really motivated her to start her school. And so I definitely want those to say there is a through line between those who are starting schools and the connections they have to why they started their school and parent choice. But Earl, I want to come to you first. And these proposed changes to the charter school program are most felt by Black and Brown school founders, those who most identify with the lived experience of the students that they're enrolling and the connections that you have in your story you have to the students who walk in and out of your schools every day. Now your students can just see you and can see the personification of the vision you have for your school and for what they can accomplish once they walk into your school building. First, tell us about the Phalen Leadership Academies and give us a feel for the families and the parents that you serve and that those who've chosen to enroll in your school.
It's the George and Veronica Phalen Leadership Academies, named after my mom and dad. And really our focus originally was to fresh start schools, brand new schools in neighborhoods where parents were aching for a choice, where the school down the street had been F-rated school, was out of control socially, emotionally, and was not giving children access to the American dream that you can use education and hard work to create your own future. These schools were doing the exact opposite. And so that's where we originally started. We found in one of the communities we were in, Indianapolis, that there was actually an oversaturation of schools, and that there were a lot of F-rated schools on the Far East Side, which is the toughest part of the city. And so we partnered with IPS, with a local philanthropic organization. They have the Mind Trust, and some laws were created to allow us to come into an existing traditional public school and help turn it around. So Phalen Leadership Academies right now is a network of 25 schools in Alabama, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Texas, and Washington, DC. We're blessed to serve about 10,000 scholars, grades K to 12. And our focus is going in to serve some of the, just a small portion of the 5 million children right now in the United States who are going to absolutely abysmal schools. Schools that you wouldn't send your enemy's children to, schools that you certainly wouldn't send your children to, and schools where parents have been limited from choice just because of where they live and because of some other circumstances. And so we try to go into those existing schools and make them places that families will love. And we've been blessed to be able to do that. We've gotten half of our schools already to become A and B rated schools. You feel the love in our schools when you come in. Our scholars feel the culture. As a Black-led organization, you kind of feel the culture of our organization, regardless of what school you sit in. We're able to attract staff, and I believe all people can be great educators, but having diverse staff, having males and females, that's very important for the development of all children, boys and girls, and we're able to do that. And yeah, we love our schools, we love our scholars, and our parents, as you said, have a choice of whether they want to be there or whether they don't want to be there, and they're choosing to be there because they know how much we love their children, and they know how much we put on the line every day to help their children realize our collective dreams for for them.
That's outstanding.
Curtis, can I just add on here?
Please.
You know, Earl is very modest, and I'm Atasha as well as Dr. Fuller. You know, you guys all have schools, but last year we did a research project on Black-led charter schools from the perspective of students, and the influence that these leaders, even on this panel, have for the students that attend their schools is outsized. Like the fact that students are tracking their movements, they are aspiring to be them one day. They see in their leaders who they can be. So the power of having a Black or brown leader at the helm of these organizations cannot be understated in terms of the impact, the affirmation, the love, and the care that these students are receiving that they often aren't receiving in some of the schools they may have attended prior to attending a charter school. They talk about the family atmosphere. They talk about having adults that look like them, caring about them, and not just a number, and being actually interested in who they are as individuals. And so I just don't want that to be lost on, yes, they are creating wonderful organizations, but so much of this work is important because of the individuals you see leading these networks in schools.
Thank you. And the impact that parents and students have walking into a school that is run, managed, facilitated by a person of color, someone who looks like them, it's even hard to quantify. But if you look at a lot of the schools that were founded, particularly in Reconstruction, by African Americans, a lot of those students went on to historically Black colleges and went on to work in their communities. And you really can't, shortchange the impact and just the power it had to see someone who looks like you operating in spaces, a place of authority, and how you move in spaces outside of that space to mimic that. And so we're so excited about that. Before we come to Atasha, I do want to go back to the audience with another question. And this is a very direct question that I'd all like you all want to answer. And this is, should race or income restrict educational options for students of color? And right now, in many ways, it does. We do have, limitations as it relates to access to certain school programs and schools, as Dr. Fuller mentioned, because parents literally can't afford to move into communities or move into school districts where the schools are providing better options. And so the question is very direct. Should race or income, which it currently does, have an impact, in many ways, a negative impact on educational options for students in America? I do want to come to Atasha, and I know she's last on, and it's not because her daughter chose Howard University over Spelman College. That's not why. I just want to put that out there right now. We love Howard University. We love Bison Moms. We love everything that Howard University stands for. And I also want to make another, be a more direct. Atasha did mention that her school is in Prince George's County, Maryland. In addition to the work I do with PPI, I'm on the Board of Education in Prince George's County, Maryland, and I've authorized her school. I just want to make that very, very clear. But I had a very long conversation with Atasha years before she started her school about coming to Prince George's County. And so I do want to hear her talk about the school, but also the parents she serves. Leaders who create single site charter schools like the one that Atasha started are also impacted by these proposed changes that Ebony mentioned earlier. The changes to the federal grants, are just really, really impact those single site charters that want to start and to grow. Atasha, why do parents choose Legends over all the other options they have in their school district?
So thank you so much. And so moving here from Buffalo, New York, about 10 years ago, from a very racially segregated small town to such a beautiful place like Prince George's County, the only thing that prevented it from being a perfect 10 were the schools. And so coming from the Regent's point of view and the educational experience, leading schools in the District of Columbia, where I literally got to prove what was possible, it opened my eyes being so close to the district in terms of the Washington, D.C. area being a very prolific and healthy space where it's a balance between traditional public schools and charter schools, and seeing that their population is significantly smaller than Prince George's County, but yet they offer more choice. And so why parents choose Legends is because it's a lot of reasons, but we only have 10 charter schools run by 4 operators here in Prince George's County. People who choose to live in Prince George's County are weighing their options very carefully. For 600 seats that we offered in our second year, we had over 2,000 applicants for those seats. And so when people choose Legends Charter School, they're very discerning, and their open house is much like you would experience when you're going to buy a house. And they're looking for a good fit. They're looking for a community. They're looking for a curriculum that's aligned. They're looking for neighbors who have same values, who may worship at the same place, children who are engaged in the same sports, who have like-minded community goals with one another. And more importantly, people choose our school because it is that familiar relationship that you mentioned, Ebony. And at Legends, I have a niece or a nephew or a loved one in almost each and every grade here, K through 6. And more importantly, as we talk about self-determination, one of the cornerstone flagship experiences of a Legends education is our financial education. Because what we believe fundamentally is that if you receive a strong foundation for social emotional learning and how you manage yourself as an academic, coupled with strong financial education beginning in kindergarten, we know that money does provide you choice. And for us at the end of that 12-year journey, we want students to be able to be smart enough, strong enough, determined enough, empowered enough to choose the future that they have been dreaming. And so whether a child decides to go to college or career is not really any of our concern. What we want to make sure is that our students are empowered to lead the life of their dreams and to serve their local community. And so what we hear time and time again, after having 93% student satisfaction, where our parents said that they loved their school and recommended to a friend, despite, in our first inaugural year, 31% of our families opened up and funded investment accounts for their students. We create an ecosystem around the work. And so we have entrepreneurial oriented families who are interested in a pathway to financial freedom, who can engage in community and support as they start up their own businesses. And they have that support through our financial education that Equity Now supports us with. And so parents coming here are not just interested in providing, getting an education for their students. They're actually looking for a way to expand their life so that they become more empowered and able to provide for themselves and their family as well.
I just want to give a quick anecdote. I actually had a text communication with Atasha just a week ago, where someone communicated with me that they were accepted into Atasha's school. This person was deciding between 2 schools, enrolling in Atasha's charter school or enrolling their child into a private school. As an officer of Prince George's County Public Schools, my goal is to ensure that we have as many options as we can for students, but also ensure that students choose Prince George's County Public Schools. And I said, Atasha, please reach out to this person, because if this person does not choose Atasha's school, they're not going to choose our school system. And I want them to be very clear about that it's not about school boards choosing whether charter or traditional public or like. I'm choosing my system, and and their parents who are saying, I'm choosing Atasha's school or I'm not going to choose a system at all. And that's their choice. That's the parent choice to do so. But we have to understand that in many ways, charter schools of choice are the options that parents are making. We need to make sure that we make the best effort to enroll them, and that's what we're doing. And hopefully that person will choose your school.
They did.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. We made news today. When this came out, these proposed changes to the charter school program, one of the biggest sort of conversations was what financial impact is this going to have on Black and brown charter schools, but also single site charter schools, and just the application process. Ebony, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing 60 additional hours of work in order just to complete the application, and that being passed down to leaders like Atasha and the nonprofits that her and Earl run in order to run their schools. Atasha, can you be a little more specific, put a little more context on if these proposed changes from the federal government do go into place? how will that impact you, your school ability to even to respond to the grant program?
Yep. And so chartering, as we all know, is very political and it's very expensive to start a school. So no matter if you have a brilliant idea and you have, the vision to execute, it takes money to do this. At the end of the day, schooling is a business. And what this means for us writ large is that most schools, and especially the size of a Legends charter school, it takes about $1 million to start up. And so if you don't have a solid infrastructure that can support the program that you're building, your school is not going to be successful in meeting those goals. More importantly, what folks have to understand is that charter schools are funded based on a per pupil allocation, and that funding formula isn't consistent across the board. And so, for example, using averages in Prince George's County, most students their education on that per pupil expenditure, they receive about $18,000. Charter schools, on the other hand, are operating at about 63% of that. And so from that 18, we receive about $12,000 to operate and do the same thing without facilities assistance, without transportation, and a lot of the other fringe benefits that come from receiving a full funded per pupil allocation for each of our scholars. So what does that mean? It means that when we're talking about pound for pound, how do we attract and retain the world's best talent for our students, that it may not make us as competitive. When we talk about competing with a district who can readily receive bond funding, which allows them to get more building for less interest, that means that we're also hamstrung because we don't have the credit and the backing to be able to do these things. And families want to make sure that A, the building is safe, beautiful for their student, and that B, that there's talent, the best talent. And then 3, why would a parent then make the choice to know that they're receiving potentially, in theory, less than they would at the traditional public schools? And so it puts a parent in a very precarious spot. And so what that means for us, as you know, because you're on our listserv, that we have to do a heavy amount of fundraising in order to make sure we can provide an abundant, rich, and not scarce. We want to make sure that we're resource rich and, more importantly, be able to compete. And so when we talk about that as a part A, Legends is approved for a K-8 campus and at capacity to be 900 students. Our curriculum is such that the students will receive advanced placement credits because we have an accelerated program. And when we're already getting momentum for expansion, this would definitely cripple our ability because the criteria is limiting in such a way that says, well, the school system obviously will have seats. The entire nation, as a result of COVID, had their population attrition. We don't know where still many of those students are. But more importantly, what that says to a parent is you don't get to choose the expanded Legends Charter School, and that opportunity is now taken off of the table. And so getting a charter approved in Prince George's County was like winning the lottery for, multi-billions. And so not to be able to fulfill our dream and be able to provide a K-12 campus, because we would also need that money for startup, is very disappointing and problematic, just for the whole of all the other charter operators here operating in Maryland under an already very stressful authorization operator relationship.
And I'd reiterate, I mean, you mentioned receiving a charter being a lottery for you. I will say that parents who are enrolled in your school, it's a lottery for them as well. And so that feeling of winning in your school or the Howard Fuller School in Milwaukee or Earl, and a number of schools, both traditional and charter, where parents are getting into the school of their choice for their child, that in many ways, and it should not have to be that way. I want to be very clear, that should not have to be that way, but right now, this is how we're operating. I do want to show our results of the survey that we conducted. Very, very clear and direct question. And this is unanimous. If in a time where there's a lot of disagreement in this country, there's one thing we can agree on, that race and income should not restrict educational options for students in America. That's very, very clear. Dr. Fuller, I want to come to you. For those who've worked, like all of us in many ways, worked our lives to really center parents, particularly Black and Brown parents, in this so-called education reform movement, the term parent power has been hijacked by conservatives in many ways for what some would call political reasons. Dr. Fuller, why is it so easy for others to sideline the voices of Black and brown parents?
Yeah, like when I hear the word hijackers, like I get a little, squeamish about that, because it's not clear to me that people have hijacked anything. What to me people are doing is what they've always done, which is to use the power that they have to take care of their children. And what happens in this country is the kids that many of us serve, they are not on the agenda in a real way for the political structure writ large in this country. Meaning we need to be absolutely clear. The kids that we serve at our school, the school that I'm sitting in right now, the political structure writ large don't give a damn about these kids. And they don't care about them because neither the kids nor their families are of value to this country. And many, many years ago, a man named Rayford Logan wrote a book called Who Needs the Negro? And essentially what he was arguing was that there was going to come a point in time, because of the economic structure of this country, where, quote, Negroes were not going to be needed. We need to face the reality of that at this point in time, we're talking about trying to educate children to give them a chance in life in this country, but they're in a country where their families are not valued. We're in a country where, when the pandemic hit, wasn't it amazing how people went from being low-income workers to being essential workers? Because all they did was change the terminology. They didn't change benefits, they didn't change salary, they didn't change any of that. All of a sudden, our parents and our community became essential workers. They wanted poor people to go out and risk their lives so people like us could be on Zoom. And unless we speak directly to that, we're not serving what our schools are supposed to ultimately be about, because it isn't just about providing the best education for our kids. It's about developing institutions that will be a part of advancing the interests of our children beyond just education, but trying to advance the interests of a community in a country that doesn't care about them. And let me try to, say this and shut up on this, Curtis, is that when I was listening to Ebony and Atasha and Earl talking about the challenges that they face and these new rules, let's be very clear. These new rules come from a so-called progressive administration. I know y'all didn't want to talk about this, but I don't care. I'm getting ready to talk about it. And the thing is, I support a lot of what this administration is doing, but we have to stand up and say to them that you're coming forward with these rules means that you're taking the organized interests in the public educational system over the interests of the families that you say that you represent. And so when Ebony talked about self-determination, this is a direct assault on the self-determination of a people. And I would ask all you so-called progressives out there, when did it become progressive to assault the self-determination of a people? But the problem that we have is that on the one hand, you have an administration that may be doing several things that are of value to our community. And then on the other, you have a group of people who say they support charters, but they're trying to keep Black people from having the right to vote. They don't want Black people to have healthcare. They don't want Black people to have housing. So what happens is those of us who care deeply about our community and believe in these schools because we believe in our people, we're in a political dilemma, right? Because on the one hand, you got people who say that they're for us, attacking us by denying self-determination. You got another party over here saying, yeah, I'm for your schools, but I don't want your parents to be able to vote. I don't want you to have healthcare. So we've got to figure out how in this environment we fight. How do we fight? Who do we join with the fight? And it's going to have to be done almost on a case-by-case basis, right? We can't afford to sell out to any of these parties. What we got to try to figure out is, how do we figure out our interests? And how do we work with whomever is helping us from an interest standpoint, almost on an issue-by-issue basis? So we got to be able to like support people when they're supporting us, stand up against them when they're not supporting us, and be comfortable with that. And so I just want to say that's the dilemma that I'm feeling deeply today. Because any of us who are in schools right now, what our kids and our families are going through, man, I never seen nothing like this in my life. I've never seen anything like this in my life. And the challenges that we're facing are so overwhelming that to be able to like try to figure out, okay, from a policy standpoint, what is it that we should be supporting? Because those of us who are in these schools, we have to support more than just education policy. We have to look at all the other policies that impact the families of the children who are coming to us, and trying to figure out how to negotiate, how to oppose the administration on these things, support them on others, and then don't be with people who are attacking the administration on the very things that our families need. So I know that wasn't exactly what you asked me, but I had to get it in while I had a chance.
Can I say something to that point, Dr. Fuller, when you talk about the assault and you brought in the political party? So I'm just going to push it even a little further in the sense that I'm an Afro-Puerto Rican woman, and Secretary Cardona is also Puerto Rican. When we think about the political injustice that is happening on the island writ large and his position of power, I think it's very interesting that when we think about John King, when we think about Arne Duncan, and even Betsy DeVos, all of them typically, and they did what they could do to advance choice. I think it's appalling that we have this leader with this ethnicity making these decisions and co-signing behind that. It's saying a lot, and it's not saying that we're understanding this, because at what point will Democrats return to being the party of the people in the truest sense? And when we think about Republicans and them opening up the door for school choice, and the NAACP, for instance, calling a moratorium for charter schools, like, we really have to figure out how to take this political nature out of this and really juxtapose where your identity, ethnicity, and those common interests come to bear as we continue to move forward in this, because this assault from a fellow Puerto Rican is absolutely concerning.
Atasha, if I could just say one thing, is that one of the things we have to embrace is the reality is you will never be able to take politics out of education, because education by definition is a political question, because he or she who controls minds has little or nothing to fear from bodies. That's what Leroy Bennett said in one of the books that he wrote. And so what I would say to you and ask you to think about, and we can talk about it sometime even further, it's not an issue of taking politics out of education. It's an issue of defining the nature of our particular political interests at different moments in history. Because with all due respect, and I'm saying this because my friend Darrell Bradford got pillared for saying something about this, you just talked about John King. John King just took a position against a scholarship program that would aid low-income students. And I respect John and everything, but when people take these positions, we have to be able to call them out without people then jumping down on your throat because you would call out a Black person or a Puerto Rican person or whatever, right? We need to call out people who take positions that are not in the interest of our people. And we need to be able to say that in ways that don't demean them personally, but makes it clear that we have a difference. We have a political difference, and we ought to be able to do that as Black people. You see what I'm saying? And it doesn't mean we can't figure out how to agree on other things, but there are moments when Black people and brown people and other people take political positions that don't necessarily advance what it is we're talking about. And we have to be comfortable calling them out, but then at the same time, coming back and supporting them when they are doing things that advance the interests of our community.
I agree.
And Curtis, if I could jump in, Dr. Fuller just went where I wanted to go. So in addition to calling people out when they are not advancing interests that help Black and Brown people, we also need to do a better job of cheerleading when people have courage. And I think one disappointing thing that I've noticed over the past several years is that very few people in positions of power in the government have shown that courage, have used their position and their influence to talk about why they support these policies that help Black and Brown children. And I think a part of it is because they haven't gotten as much thanks and appreciation as folks on the other side. But that being said, a part of why so many policy advances have been made is because we've had champions. We've had people who were unapologetic and who were unafraid to stand for what they believed in. And we didn't demonize them because they had a different policy decision and say, you know, we're canceling them or something like that, but we would have debates on the merits. So I completely agree with Dr. Fuller that we have to be more nuanced and more sophisticated in how we're addressing these things, but we also need our leaders to lead.
You know, I saw something on there. I saw somebody in the chat, I think it was Mark Lerner or somebody put in there that Black people vote Democrats. And I don't want to leave that as without speaking to that. The question will be why. And I would argue this, that one of the difficult things that we have is that as deeply as we care about education, education in and of itself may not be a wedge issue for the vast majority of our families. Because our families are trying to negotiate, how am I going to eat? Mm-hmm. Where am I going to stay? How am I going to take care of my family with a wage that doesn't allow me to take care of my family? What am I going to do when I have people telling me that they're going to shut down the number of voting places, or they're not going to allow absentee ballots? And so what I would say to Mark is a part of the problem here is that, yeah, Black people may be voting Democratic because for a lot of them, the Democratic Party may be standing firm on issues other than education. And so that was the thing I was trying to talk about when I talk about the struggle that we have to try to define where do we go in a political sense when neither party supports in total the agenda that would advance the interests of Black people.
One of the first things I was told when I joined the school board was, remember this, Curtis, permanent interest, not permanent friends. Permanent interest. And that's not unique to African Americans or Latinos in politics. That's what every other group is doing. Every other group is saying, these are my interests. And whether I'm willing to go wherever and to work with whoever that it takes in order to get that done and be consistent with that. And so a lot of what you all are saying is really in the spirit of what I was taught really early on. In the last 7 minutes we have, I do want to talk about the right now and the tomorrow. In many ways, you know, this fight for parents to choose where their children go to school, again, from the beginning of our discussion, dates back hundreds of years, particularly for people who look like us. And for those who would say, you know, Curtis, if I was alive back then, this is what I would be doing. Or if I was, I'd be sitting in. I would be, if you know, we have these historians who like to romanticize the past, not understanding that a lot of what our ancestors fought for, we are fighting for again. And so this quote I saw, it says, if you've ever wondered what you'd be doing during slavery, during the Holocaust, or the Civil Rights Movement, you're doing it right now. Oh, I would have been Harriet, I would have been with Harriet. Well, they're Harriets right now trying to get children free and need your help. Well, to the right moment, I would have been sitting right there at the lunch counter at Woolworths, right next, I would have right there with students from North Carolina A&T. There's a seat waiting for you right now, and it's waiting for you. So all of you, and I want to start with you, Earl, and this is be our last question we're gonna end with. Make your case for why people who are listening in now should care about parent choice and why they should put their time into working on this as opposed to working on all the other things that we are addressing now in our community.
Well, I think others have articulated why parent choice matters. And the only two things I'd add is, one is we live in a country that prides itself on capitalism and competition as being one of the things that makes us a great nation. But when it comes to schooling and to parent choice, we seem to want to squash that. I think the second observation, when I hear people who are against parental choice, it really takes me back to 1850s and the fugitive slave laws. And for those of you who don't know what the fugitive slave laws are, it's if somebody escaped from the South or another slave state to the North, the Northerners were required under this law to give back those slaves to the Southern states. And that's the type of mentality that I see and hear as it relates to, wait a second, parents are going to a failing school that's dysfunctional. The teachers are not bringing love and passion to our students. Our students are not learning what they'll need to have a better life. But if they want to leave that school, that's an atrocity. And we need to find a way to fight independent schools, parental choice, and send them back to the district. And I think that's abhorrent.
Atasha, why should people care about parent choice now?
So choice is a cornerstone of our democracy at its core. And parents, whether you're interested in school choice or whatever that might be, what you need to consider is the larger ramifications. To what end will the government go to make it so that you are under their thumb? And similar to other laws that have been passed, like Roe versus Wade, we're watching them chip at the fundamental right that you have as a citizen of the United States of America. And as a mom of two who decided how my children will be raised in the environment, I'm unwilling and will be unapologetic in fighting to make sure that my rights as a mom aren't tethered at all. And so anyone who's listening to this needs to think about this, in my opinion, much more outside of the singular case of education. But what do we do to put those who are trying to earn our vote on notice to say, stop, this is too much? And so this is where we are right now.
Ebony, why should folks get involved in this at all?
Yeah, thanks for that question. You know, I really struggle with why we have to have this conversation. Choice is prevalent in almost every other area of our lives. We choose what doctor we go to. We choose what car we drive. We choose what groceries we have in our homes. We choose which colleges we go to. We choose whether our students go to a babysitter or a childcare center. Why is this so controversial that you get to choose the education for your child in K-12? So I flip that question back to you. Why shouldn't it be a parent's choice when we have it in almost every other area of our life?
Dr. Fuller, we could give you the last word. Make the case. Make the case why someone should care about parent choice right now.
Yeah, I just want to build on something that Earl said for my answer. And this I learned this when I read a book called Force and Freedom by Callie Jackson. Because Earl, you made the point that during the fugitive slave law, when slaves like escaped, the slave owners could come get them. What we need to know is that there were Black people who set up safe houses so that, in fact, when the slaves escaped, they gave them a safe place to be. And there was a battle one time in Philadelphia where Black people killed a slave owner who came to try to get a slave back. And so the analogy that I'm using, and also in this book, I learned that a Black woman financed John Brown's attack on Harper's Ferry. I just thought I'd throw that in there. But Earl, the point I'm trying to make here is that we could see our schools as like these safe houses for our children, right? And that they're escaping from something that does not work for them, and we're not going to give them back. We're not going to give them back. That we're going to give them refuge and love and care and educate them. So I just wanted to say that's the reason to do it, building off the analogy that you made using the fugitive slave law in 1850.
So Curtis, someone put in the chat, how do we fight? And so write as if your life depends on it. How do you engage with those people who are in the positions of power, your local school board members, whoever it might be, so that this is more a normalized conversation and it is at the table, it's almost a non-negotiable. But for every parent to know that nobody wants to hear 5,000 parents, storming the Annapolis townhouse. But when we don't organize and we don't show that this is a matter of importance, then they believe that they can do whatever they want without consequence.
That's a great place to stop this conversation. I want to thank my panelists for an amazing conversation. Those of you who listened in live, those who've contributed to our conversation, this is so important. This is really at the foundation of the promise that this country has for those who call themselves citizens and reside here. And so thank you so much for contributing to this conversation. Continue to follow the work of the 74, of the Reinventing America Schools Project, of the Charter School Growth Fund, of the Legends Public Charter School, and the Phalen Leadership Academies to find out what each of us are doing to really address this issue. Thank you so much for joining us today. You have an amazing day. Thank you.